When you think about Norway, it almost sounds too good to be true, right? It's consistently ranked as one of the wealthiest, happiest countries on Earth, with an incredible standard of living. But its story isn't just about striking it rich with oil, not even close. It's about a series of brilliant, incredibly disciplined choices. So let's dig in and uncover the real strategy behind Norway's insane wealth. So this is the big question, isn't it? How does a country that was, for a long time, one of the poorer nations in Europe, a nation of fishermen and farmers, transform itself into a global economic powerhouse in basically a century? The answer is a wild story of hardship, a jaw-dropping discovery, and some of the smartest long-term thinking you'll ever see. Okay, to really get a sense of the scale here, just look at this number. $1.9 trillion. dollars. That's the value of Norway's sovereign wealth fund. It is the largest on the entire planet. This is what their strategy built, and we're going to break down exactly how they did it. But before we can even talk about the oil and those trillions of dollars, we have to go back. Because really, to get why modern Norway is the way it is, you have to see what it was before all the money started rolling in. It was a country shaped not by oil, but by water, rugged mountains, and a whole lot of struggle. Man, this slide right here just lays out the crazy contrast at the heart of this whole thing. Back in the 1800s, Norway was poor. I mean, really poor. Only about 3% of its land could even be farmed. It was a tough rural society struggling with too many people and not enough resources. I mean, going from that to where they are today, it's one of the most incredible turnarounds in modern history. And this timeline shows just how tough it was. Things got so bad that around 800,000 Norwegians packed up and left for America. But then, something started to shift. In the 1890s, they figured out how to harness their first real resource, water. They used their incredible waterfalls to generate hydroelectric power, building a solid industrial base long before anyone was thinking about oil. And that experience, well, it turned out to be absolutely crucial down the road. Okay, so that brings us to the big one, the moment that changed everything. Norway had already built a pretty respectable foundation on hydropower and shipping, but the discovery of black gold under the North Sea was about to put them on a trajectory that nobody could have possibly imagined. So, after years of companies exploring the North Sea and coming up empty, an American petroleum company finally hit the jackpot. They found a massive oil field in the Norwegian sector, one of the biggest offshore fields ever discovered at the time. For Norway, it was like winning the global lottery. And wow, this chart really puts that transformation into perspective. By 2023, oil and gas money was making up almost a third of the entire government's revenue and more than half of all their exports. It just completely supercharged their economy, funding a huge expansion of their social safety net and improving life for pretty much everyone. But here's where the story gets really, really clever. See, finding oil is one thing. Actually managing that sudden, massive wealth, that's a totally different ballgame. History is littered with countries that got ruined by finding resources, and Norway was absolutely determined not to become another one. So this was the massive question staring Norwegian leaders right in the face. They had seen other countries fall victim to what economists call the resource curse, where a huge boom in one area ends up wrecking the rest of the economy. They knew they had to be incredibly careful. And believe me, this curse, it is a very real thing. All around the world, you can find examples of countries that struck it rich with oil or diamonds, only for it to lead to corruption, conflict, and a weaker economy than before. Norway's entire success story is built on the fact that they saw this trap and consciously decided to avoid it. Now, a really specific version of this curse is something called Dutch disease. Here's how it works. A ton of oil money comes flooding in, which makes the value of your national currency shoot way up. All of a sudden, everything else you make and sell, like fish or manufactured goods, becomes super expensive for other countries to buy. Your traditional industries just can't compete, and they start to die off. Norway looked at this and said, okay, that is the thing we have to stop from happening. So, how'd they do it? Well, they came up with this incredibly disciplined and pretty unique approach that's now famous as the Norwegian model. Honestly, it's a masterclass in long-term economic planning. This four-step plan is the secret sauce. First up, they kept it public. They created a state-owned oil company to make sure the profits benefited the whole country, not just private corporations. Second, they created a giant national savings account, basically a piggy bank for the entire nation. Instead of spending the money as it came in, they saved it. Third, and this is the absolute masterstroke to avoid Dutch disease, they invested every single cent of it outside of Norway. This kept the oil money from flooding their home economy. And finally, they made a rule for themselves. They could only spend a tiny fraction, about 3% of the fund's value each year. This makes sure the principle never runs out. And this quote right here, it just sums up the whole mindset. This was never about getting rich quick. It was about taking a temporary boom from a resource that will one day run out and turning it into permanent prosperity for their kids and their grandkids and on and on. Just an incredible act of looking ahead. So what does all that foresight look like today in real terms? Well, if you took that massive fund and divided it up equally among every single man, woman, and child in Norway, each person would get about $340,000. That's a wild number, and it really brings the scale of this thing down to a personal level. And this just puts it all in perspective. That $1.9 trillion fund, it owns about 1.5% of every single publicly listed company on the planet. And get this, the fund that was built on oil money, it deliberately avoids investing in fossil fuels. They're using the money from oil to diversify away from oil. Okay, this all brings us to the final and maybe the most fascinating part of Norway's story, and that is the huge contradiction that sits right at the heart of the country's identity today. This chart just lays out the paradox in plain sight. On the one hand, Norway is a fossil fuel superpower. It's a huge exporter and has become Europe's biggest supplier of natural gas. But then you look at what they do at home. The country runs almost entirely on clean hydropower, and more than 90% of all new cars they sell are electric. They're literally fueling the old world while building the new one. So yeah, Norway is basically living a double life. It powers the world with fossil fuels, while at the exact same time, it's creating one of the greenest, most forward-thinking societies on Earth for itself. It's this very pragmatic, and you have to admit, deeply fascinating approach to the global energy transition. So in the end, this isn't a story about a lucky country. It's a story about a culture that was shaped by hardship, and when it was suddenly faced with an unbelievable windfall, it chose discipline and long-term planning over a short-term party. They are using the wealth from their fossil-fueled present to build a solid bridge to a very different, sustainable future. Which leaves us with one last big question. As one of the world's most successful oil states, but also a true leader in green energy at home, Norway is in such a unique position. Can it resolve its own paradox and actually show the rest of us how to build that bridge to a sustainable world? It's a huge question, and the answer will be fascinating to watch unfold.